That makes it much more readable, and I think, oh, that's a real world example, so to speak.
Right.
I can go and apply this somewhere instead of just having a bunch of lines of code.
Dump of syntax or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So the release process is a thing big change we're making. So it's absolutely worth just a few minutes talking about it and the pains about it. Now another thing, if you've got some Unix friends that are like, you guys, when are you going to get apt-get? That is absolutely a way where it's so easy once you get on a foreign system to just start to bring in packages and start to bring in this stuff. Now that's a big change we're making here. So we introduced a module called OneGet. Now in the WMF 5 release, it's actually broken. So there's actually a new version you can get from the GitHub, super agile. Now I actually did that. So it's just a zip that you can download and install. This version of OneGet, let's import it here. A bunch of cool commands for dealing with packages. You can find them, you can search them, you can install them. And so now you can imagine saying, you're going to a foreign system, it's like, I need a modern editor. when you're sick of Notepad. Okay, so now we're getting, OneGet is a package manager. So it's always right to say things twice. Package managers are things like Chocolatey. They'll go off to the Chocolatey resource. Chocolatey has packages. You can see the popular ones, start searching for them. So this is an example of a package manager repository. 2,219. All of these things are, in general, packaged up and contributed by the community. So that's a risk. This isn't Microsoft saying anything that you can find in here is safe to download and be in your little cocoon and don't worry about it. This is you downloading code from the internet, so just be aware of that. Go through the proper sourcing and care that you normally would.
You can set up your own repository now.
Correct, yeah. So the point is, this is a package manager. Now one of those things is Chocolatey, you could go against that. But Chocolatey is based on the NuGet distribution system. Now you can install your own NuGet, or you could have a community NuGet that's like, I've verified the social security number of everybody who's uploaded to this thing. So this thing can talk against tons of repositories. And you're going to see that we continue to move this forward. Chocolatey is one. You might have, in the future, something like going against GitHub for code. Whatever it is, this is the way to start installing and finding packages in Windows. So I found Vim, and now all I have to do is
I don't think you're using the latest version.
They broke that one too?
if the find works, the install usually works. But this error makes me worried also.
Provider.
Are you sure you're using the latest version? Because I thought that the latest version doesn't have the destination.
So this will go off, get the package from Chocolatey, unzip it, and one of the things it does do is it asks you, this provider, which is the Chocolatey in this situation, this provider is not trusted, and it's going to ask you this every time. You might get annoyed and say, yes, I trust this provider. But what you can also do is change the provider properties and say, after a while, stop bugging me about whether I trust it. I'm going to figure out whether I trust Chocolatey independently. If I said I'm going to install Vim, then I'm going to go off and I'm going to check out that package first, and then from then on, I just trust the things that I'm downloading.
I had a question about that. How is that going with the OneGet development? That's a different team? that's developing it,
I don't know if org charts are interesting things here. It's kind of like a sister team or maybe a cousin team.
but still from Microsoft?
Yes.
Now,
Okay, so you can see here there's a prompt. Vim is a package source that's not trusted. So, of course, install package doesn't trust everything coming from Chocolatey by default. So you can kind of decide here. I think we need to do an improvement here on error messages that says, if you always trust this, here's how to change it. But I'm going to say I want to install this package.
Yeah, is there a way to say that you always trust Chocolatey?
Pardon?
Is there a way to let PowerShell know that you always will trust Chocolatey?
Yes. So there's a way in here.
Force parameter, something like that.
What we were, so there's, these are the package sources. So you can, currently, you have to unregister the package source, re-register it with a trusted. We're making some changes in this still, this is a preview. But that would be the idea, is you can start to edit package sources and say that the Chocolatey package source is trusted.
when you do the show provider, it shows whether it's trusted or not.
Right.
What if you had multiple providers that had the same package and one of them was trusted? Would it automatically figure out and say, well, I have it from a trusted source and just install it?
I think we generated an error message if your install matches two providers.
Okay.
And then you would have to disambiguate using parameters in the install package.
What's the order in which the providers are searched? Trusted first?
I don't know offhand. So now we've installed Vim, so now we have a modern editor. Now you can get some real power. Although I would say the nice thing about Vim, regardless, so you spend a bit of time learning it, they do have a console version. So, that is a thing that you don't have to be popping a GUI on a remote server if you don't need to. So there's a big change. Now we've got apt-get, PowerShell is able to go off, find and install packages, and we're just going to see that grow and grow and grow. Now, as a subset of that thing, have you ever noticed that when you type in PowerShell console, it looks like this. You type in the PowerShell ISE, it looks so much better. And then you start wanting to use GUI apps all the time so that you can do things like copy, paste. Like, those are pretty freaking new things. Now what we've also done, in addition to being able to install apps and packages, there's of course PowerShell specific things out there, right? So modules that people are sharing. And one of the problems that's happened is that you've got people are putting them on GitHub or on their blog or O'Reilly sample sites, just random places, PoshGet. What we've also added here is a find-module, so a bunch of module commands that are around finding and installing modules. Now that knows what to do separately than oneget, right? So oneget is going to run an arbitrary installer on that package. So a danger with that is, you're downloading a package, you got to be at that point trusting it because the installer you need to really worry about. We can be a bit stronger here when it comes to PowerShell, where if you're installing a module, that's just dumping it into a directory. So if you guys haven't seen, the PS readline module is from Jason Shirk. He's a dev on the PowerShell team, and it's amazing. It's fundamental change in the way that you start to interact with your console. Now you can see there's been a bunch of versions of PS readline. He's been publishing it, updating it, pushing it, but that looks really great. And the description is great, so obviously you're going to want to install this. Exactly. Again, here's a question, do you trust this package source? And this is where, for example, internally you might set up package sources that are trusted, that are just my kind of internal IT modules, wouldn't have this. Okay, so we somehow got this PS readline module.
Lee, if
Yes.
you set up your own internal source for module,
Yeah.
can you restrict it just to that to stop people going outside?
that comes a question of what are you trying to do around security, right? So if you're trying to fundamentally prevent them, that's the thing you do at the firewall. Because they can also, in that PowerShell, just re-add the package source.
Okay, so maybe recast the question to make it the default, and they would explicitly have to add an external one back in, and then you can block it to the firewall anyway.
Right. The answer, you can remove the default providers. That is also like under flux as we're going through what does it look like when you actually set up one of these? Would it make sense to have a DSC resource to set the search order or something else like that? So now we can import a module. This wasn't me going off to someone's GitHub, downloading a zip, opening it, building it, putting it in PS module path. Now in their zip, do they have the module location as a subfolder already or not? It just gets complicated. But now I have, the full benefit of PS readline, can copy. I'm just Control-C, Control-V here, paste. So just like that, you hear about a great module, find it, install it, you're good. So that's been a really big change. Yeah.
Yeah. Now the ones that are present in the modules, that's being controlled by Microsoft, right? Which modules are available at?
Yes. For now, the gallery is kind of a closed ecosystem. We're just kind of populating it with some modules, and it's not us. It's actually the authors, and their live IDs are whitelisted of who can participate. That's not going to be the way it is permanently. Obviously, we want this to be the next thing where you don't ever think about how do I get this module. It's, of course, get it off of PowerShell again.
Yeah, why I'm asking is because there are many great modules.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't know about it because it's so fragmented.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Discovery is one of the biggest things, right?
Lee, can you give a list of the modules currently in there? Because there are quite a few from the MVPs.
Ready?
This will take some time.
So if anyone is
So there's a couple. Now that I've got PS readline name here, I can just page up and page down. So there's a bunch of good stuff coming in here. Check out all those X resources. Those are the ones of us shipping quick, shipping agile. And it also starts to open up some really interesting questions about when, it starts to make you wonder, like when should a module ship in Windows versus ship in the gallery, right? So it's an interesting thing for us to start to wrestle as a community, as a team as well.
Does it actually install this to the user's module path or the system module path?
Actually, you have an option there.
Or what's the default?
We've waffled on that. Right now, we were originally under the idea that as an administrative task, you might be wanting to dump this always into the full OS by default, especially when it comes to DSC resources, because DSC resources are modules, but they need to be available from the local system context, which is a system-wide thing. We've changed that so that, if I remember, as a regular user, it goes into your regular user account. As an admin, it's going to be going off into the system. So you can see here where you're going to place it. Scope, dash scope, current user, local machine, the same way that you do with execution policy, essentially.
Does that work? So if you've extended your module path to have your own folder, is that picked up by install module, or is it just the default that it works with?
Install module goes against the default, so it's going to go against, when it's the regular user, it's going to go against my documents, Windows PowerShell modules. When you say local machine, it's going to dump that off into program files, Windows PowerShell modules.
So if you've got a more complicated module path, you have to proxy that and add them in.
If you have a complicated module path that deletes the users, then you'll have to be tricky there. One thing it does allow, though, is maybe let's see here. Now, one thing that you might imagine happening in the future is the ability to save a module to a specific location. That's also a thing that's very important when it comes to doing a code review before you actually shepherd it into the system. Now, we're not so concerned about the security-wise of it going directly into your PS module path, because that isn't going to be loaded necessarily by default. But we do want the ability to save a module, review it, usher it in, and then from there, you now have just a module package and you would deploy it to a custom module path if you wanted to. Now, some other things that are kind of neat. So we made a big investment in terms of just making it easier to make your PowerShell the way that you want it to be, right? Pulling out modules, pulling out packages. There's also been just some straight up Commando tweaks. This is the one get that I downloaded, so let me delete it here. So I can go invoke web request. So invoke web request has existed for a while. We're downloading the zip. Now we can unblock the file. So we've got expand and compress archives. You don't have to go off dealing with 7-zip or downloading all these extra stuff. So pretty great support. Now I can go into now we've got the zips, right? Now you can just move this off into your personal module path. So really easy to automate some of these things. We've also just kind of fixed some annoyances, kind of like those burrs I was talking about that we fixed between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, every single version. And so now I can do something like new item foo.txt. You no longer have to say -item type file and remember and tab expand. Not a big change, but prove that we still care after all this time.
Lee,
Yes.
I missed where the expand archive command comes from.
That one is actually built into PowerShell version 5.
And I also had a question about that, mainly regarding the naming with the compressed archive. Why not the new archive?
The question around naming about why compress and why not new, the idea is that the standard verbs, if you can find one that's more specific, then that's great, right? So everything can ultimately be like a new, get, set, invoke. Kind of that's like the REST methodology, all those are verbs. But if you can be more expressive and say expand and compress, then you read it, you'll know exactly what it's doing.
Lee,
Yes.
is the item type now by default a file, or is it seen in an extension and making it a file?
The item type in the file system provider, because that's very specific to the file system provider, is now a file. Then there's also...
So the archive commands work just against zips or any other formats?
Currently just zips. Yeah, Windows also has built-in support for cab files. We haven't done anything around RAR and LHARC and all those old things. LHA files, anyone remember those?
Yeah.
BBS days, man.
And does it handle encrypted zips?
Let's see. Well, what you can do here.
Quite a problem.
Oh man, what are all the things with compress? Oh, hold on. That's a lot. That's the one I wanted.
PS reclam.
Anyways, I'll stop pimping it. Get it. So these are the things you can do with compressor archive right now. And also, if you're seeing things that are like lighting light bulbs in your head, the Connect is the great place to say, saw this demo, would have loved it if it had this. Or and also, as you guys are doing early adopting in terms of playing around with stuff, finding bugs, right there. You know, don't worry about us not caring that you found this edge case. We care deeply about every single one of those that comes in. So file and connect, that is absolutely key when it comes to this, this rapid cycle. Now we've also got something like this. Maybe that's not a good one. Now you see here I've got all these keys and their properties. One of the things that's always been a pain in the registry since V1, proves that we still care, we still love you, is getting the values of these things. It used to be get item property, inet stp, setup string, dot setup string. Can't believe that just worked. So that kind of feels silly, all that typing. Small change, but it's still little things that little things that matter. Was there a question? No. Another thing we've added is symlink support, so you no longer need to shell out to CMD for MK-link or anything like that. So I'm not going to show that because we got it. You can find it. Cool. So it's new item dash type. Oh, actually, I need to go. They're only on the file system. Oh, that's fine. So see, you can see here what are the things that it supports. All the file and directory are always there, but now you can do symlinks and great stuff.
Why not the junction? File, directory, symbolic link.
Agile, my man. Yeah, we're not just going to be symlinks. This is just getting it started.
I think the right response is not yet.
Okay.
Yep. By agile, my man, that means it's coming. So that's the big one. We've also made a huge improvement in debugging. Huge. If you've used debugging in the past in the ISE, so should I put an if condition in there or not? I'm not quite sure on that answer. You should have seen his rant. He was like, if you put an if condition in here, you're wrong. Everyone was like, I did that once. All right. So even used to being able to be in the ISE, put breakpoints, step through things. But how many of you have been in this situation? You're like, what the heck is this thing doing? It's saying hello world, but what is it doing? Where is it at? Ooh. Control break, if your keyboard had it, will let you break into the current script, explore the variables. You wonder, like, what's the state of this variable? Let you break in immediately, explore around, tweak around, and then exit, and the thing will continue again. Now that's one thing. You've got control of the console, you've got an application, a script that's kind of busted, you don't know what to do. But check this out. Now I can do enter PS host process. Now what we've done in the latest version of PowerShell is everything PowerShell that starts up, it creates a pipe that's waiting for connections to it for remote process debugging. Now this was 7708. So enter PS host process -ID 7708. PowerShell's running, but now I've got a background PowerShell thread that's able to start inspecting things in that process, trying to figure out what's going on. Maybe you've got, if it's a C# app, you can start to look at the statics, investigate that way. I would point out that this is all done on behalf of you as a user. So this is not, you know, a regular user connecting up to admin session and like doing bad stuff. This is as though in Visual Studio you were able to connect to another process that you own. Now I can do things like, you know, you don't really necessarily want to know what's in the file system there, but, you know, to take a look at this, console background color equals red. So now I just changed actual live state in this process. You know, if something's messed up, you can start to tweak at it, check out. You don't have access to variables. They're different run spaces. That's the way that PowerShell separates sort of running pipelines. So this is why I'm able to have two PowerShell running pipelines at the same time.
Could you dynamically insert a breakpoint?
Well, what you might be able to do here is, now that you're in a process, you can take a look at the run spaces in there. So you see here at the remote host, that's the one that I've connected up with, doing some interactive management. Run space 1 is going to be that first run space in the process. Oh man, I thought I was screwed. I didn't have a break key, but I'm still able to go off and debug the run space. Here, I'm yelling at you guys. I'm not red about it. So if this red glow on my face, it's not because I got a tan. So these are all the variables currently in that script. And you can see, you know, if I was keeping a counter there, you can see what it currently is. So there's that kind of question about creating live breakpoints. I can set a PS breakpoint here. And we've done all this same support for, you know, this is connecting to a live process, debugging it, doing some fun stuff. In addition to that, we've added the ability to debug jobs. So you've got a job going in the background, start job, and it's doing this crazy background stuff, and no console window. You can connect up to that job, debug it, set breakpoints, continue, whatever you want. We've extended the support for remoting. So now remoting sessions, they used to not support debugging, interactive debugging, but now you can connect to a remote server. That remote server, you can attach to a PS host process, and they're attached to a run space running in there. And you don't have to worry about actually kind of TSing into that server to figure out what the heck is happening with a background PowerShell job. So huge amount of changes here. It's definitely worth taking another look at debugging.
Enter host process.
Enter PS host process. Yes?
You said you couldn't go from a less privileged user, but you can go the other way around, right? So if you have an administrator, you can look at other processes? Or
So the answer there is that we're not changing the Windows security model. And so if you're able to do it as an administrator in terms of debugging, so other tools like WinDBG or Visual Studio, those have the ability to attach to any process on the system. So we're just literally within that same umbrella. We didn't implement our own security mechanisms here, which is one of the only reasons why you can trust PowerShell, is because we're not going off and inventing new security mechanisms that are different than the OS ones. Now I'm done debugging that run space, and I'm going to exit here. And now it's back. So I might have investigated some state, changed some state, and I'm good to go. So they did a version of this in the 60s, you know, connecting up to space shuttles and attaching with Lisp. So, you know, PowerShell's taken a while to catch up, but it's pretty fun stuff. Now, talking about remote debugging, have you guys seen the, I need to load this as admin. Now, how many times have you been in this issue? You're debugging your remote machine. So you've entered a PS session on a remote machine, and you've navigated C, temp. Now there's this file here, and you don't like what it is. You want to change some things in there, you need to edit a little config file or something. So the answer up until now has been either a complicated script or module to download files, but PS edit has always been a way to edit files. Now we've got a remote file talking to that computer over PowerShell remoting. I didn't need to open up any UNC paths or anything else. Save it. And now edit a remote file. So that is totally in the vein of the remoting stuff we've done, and it's been really helpful. Now another thing that's been a big change that's gonna start to ruffle some feathers is classes in PowerShell. Now you might wonder, for one thing, why would you ever do classes in PowerShell, in a scripting language, in an admin language? Now, how many people have written like PS custom object as a way to like output structured data? Have you ever stored it in a variable so that you can sort of change data without having to just be this random array? Classes really are a way to think about structured data. And so anytime you've been there and said, well, that property, was it like the first element in the array or the second element of the array? Well, you just name those elements of the array, and those become class properties. So what we've done, though, is in the past it used to be add type was the only way to get these in. What we've done is really sat back and thought, what do classes look like for somebody that's familiar with the PowerShell language? And how would you write one if you're used to writing scripts with methods and properties and everything else? So it kind of looks like this. That's not a big surprise.
What?
Now classes have constructors, which is the, when you create one of these things, it's stuff that will happen automatically. You can give them parameters. So when you create one of these things, I take a in1 and an in2.
The name of the constructor and the name of the class need to be the same?
Exactly. Yes. Now, if you don't have any parameters, that's the one that's going to be called by default. When you start calling the class with parameters, that's when it gets new things.
Is this all still case insensitive?
Yes, still case insensitive. The release notes do a pretty good job of showing the actual syntax. I'm going to kind of give a bit of a fly through here. So there's that. You've got a class, my class. You can have properties, like the structured data that you used to use PS custom object for input and output. These are the properties. Now you've got named access to data. I might be able to say that this guy is an int, and this one is a date time.
Getting more of a C# class now.
What's that?
It's getting more of a C#.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely getting close to the constructs you need for really good data manipulation. Now, sometimes classes really are packages of data, and then what really makes them powerful as compared to just PS custom object are functions and methods that can act on that data. So I can write a method here, a myHelper, and maybe this thing returns an int, and it takes in a parameter. Now you see these squigglies here. What's going on? we've made a big change. Does anybody know the term dynamic scoping in PowerShell? The idea behind that is when you've got a script, right, it defines a variable $A. Now you've got a function here that refers to $A. Now if you call that function from that script, that A gets inherited from whatever's kind of hanging around, right? So if you had a function that changed $A, and then it called another one that referred to $A, it's very useful from a shell perspective. People would hate us if you had to declare every variable up front. But what we've done in classes is make sure that variables are lexically scoped. So that's what's more traditional in C# and other languages. And lexically usually just means visually, like you match up braces, and that's the scope of it here. That's not why these red guys are here. I'll talk about it in a second. Now if I have $A here, and I call this method from a function that also has $A, that's not going to work. It's not going to see that because it's going to know that was never defined or used in this method. So we made a change there to support lexical scoping. But what it is complaining about, you know, you guys write wrapper functions like myGetProcess, and your last line is just getProcess. And the magic of that, so easy, it just dumps out everything that used to happen. You don't have to worry about rolling, wrapping, unrolling, returning. That's a very useful thing for interactive scripts. Sometimes that ends up biting you. You know, you see there where I've done $null equals something as you're writing a larger script because some random .NET API was returning the count of the array list before I started. Like, who cares about that? So these guys, what we've done inside the class is every return must be explicit. And so by default, it's not going to return anything. If I had said void here, nothing I do in here is going to get dumped out to the user. I said this was an int though, so I do need to return something here. So those are some big language changes that have happened in terms of classes. Now you might say, Lee, what does this mean to an average IT admin? So here's an example that I'll show you. So box demo. This is super important stuff to have running on your screen in the background.
No Rick Astley.
Now, you could have done that without classes. You know, you could have people writing ray tracers and stuff in assembly language from the dawn of time, but it starts to get a lot more clean when you start to take a look at how you can package data and offer methods to operate on that data. I'm not going to go over this too deeply, but we see here we've got a point. You know, points take coordinates, x, y, and z. This is a graphic object. You know, a graphic object is a collection of points. You see here the points, remember, where you've got a graphic object, you add some points to it, some random stuff. You know, an object should be able to draw itself. That's a useful thing. I shouldn't have to have another script that's iterating over the private stuff in this class and dealing with its points. Erase, you know, you don't want to have stuff everywhere. A draw method to actually put it onto the screen. This thing can take a look at the console. So you can see how this stuff becomes a useful way to package the data and then the behavior associated with that data. And that's really where this starts to become really useful, some rotation stuff. Now we are on the start of our journey with classes. As you start to play around with classes, maybe some of the C# stuff starts making more sense. And then you go, oh, you know, C# has this has, you know, generics or inheritance and stuff. Our focus for classes right now is primarily on making it easier to write DSC resources. If you've ever tried to go down that path, what you've seen is, I need to create a MOF file and a syntax and required things. DSC classes are exactly data and methods that operate on that data, get, set, test. And so classes make it bleedingly easy to say, here are my, you know, my required properties, here's my get, set, test, So you have this one little script that's a resource that has a class, rather than having to go off and create all these, crazy schemas and everything else. So we've made a big update around there. Another thing we've done is, I was talking a bit about security before, and there's a big rash of security research happening because people have found that PowerShell is it's a fun way to start to do stuff that used to suck in the security community, right? You're on a pen test, you're being paid to break into an enterprise, and you finally break into somebody's admin account, and you're forced to use VBScript, assembly language, C++, who wants that kind of stuff? So they're realizing that PowerShell is this inbox thing that is fun, it's blue, it's got objects, and it's got access to .NET. So naturally, the whole security research community is getting really interested in the things you can do for PowerShell. Now, they're not breaking the system with PowerShell. They're not getting past security things in Windows. You've got an administrator on that machine who's running arbitrary code. Of course, administrators can install drivers. Of course, they can access kernel memory. That's what an administrator is. There is a good point, though, about if I've been completely breached, how do I find out? How do I find out if somebody at the command line here is running some box thing? What is PowerShell actually doing there? And that's been a thing where the system generally isn't too helpful for incident responders. PowerShell is one of the things. If you're doing crazy .NET code, just typing it in or pasting it in, that's going to be all in memory, and that's a hard thing to do forensics on afterwards if you have a really advanced response team that can actually take an image and do forensics. Now what we have done is added group policies around, and obviously engine support for a bunch of things. So transcripting now, it used to be implemented in the PowerShell console itself. So the PowerShell has an engine, and it has the things that show that engine. So the blue in the console here, that's a console host. The ISE is its own host. So what we used to have I don't want to type that. Inside that transcript is hello world, okay? And it shows what happened. Although one of the things that we did do, I'll show you so I don't want to type. Okay, start transcript, random file. You notice that we now document which machine it's from, because now we have a group policy that can say, I'm going to redirect all the transcripts to a common log share. Once that thing's off the box, that becomes a great source of incident response data. You can actually see exactly what happened on the machine. Now obviously if you're setting up one of these collectors of transcripts, you want to lock it down, make sure that everybody can write to it, nobody can enumerate the files, nobody can read from it. But once you've got that, you can say this machine got compromised, here are the transcripts over the last couple of days.
Can you enforce a transcript is always started whenever PowerShell is opened?
Yep. One of the things we did mess up in this release, in this preview release, is not shipping the ADMX files for all these settings. So you cannot go to the administrative templates and check out our transcripting options, but obviously that's not going to be a problem for long. But there are, enforce the system transcript, enforce the output location. In terms of transcripting, it's very, very useful. So your system transcript, even if the users are starting and stopping them, that's not going to impact the system one. Now, this doesn't mean that somebody should feel glee because they managed to make PowerShell stop transcripting, right? Once somebody has full control over PowerShell, they can make it do whatever they want. They can inject .NET code. That is just the Windows security model. But if you've taken it off the box fast enough, you still have the forensics and the incident response data to know that somebody was doing this stuff in their console. But what I wanted to show now, that used to just be a string, but it looks normal. now it actually has a path property associated with it. Now you don't have to start a transcript with a known name. You can still let PowerShell generate the one with a server name and a GUID and just all this random stuff, and then you can access $t.path. So that's one thing, there's transcripting, common log storage, but we didn't just fix it here. Now in the ISE, now what does this do? Works. The reason why this works is that we did not go off into the ISE and write a bunch of code to duplicate what happened in the console. That's just not the right way to spend your time. What we did is we put all this support up into the engine itself. So anything that is using PowerShell on the system, whether it's the ISE or whether it's Primal Studio or anything like that, now has transcript support. So unless they're explicitly blocking this commandlet, they're going to get it. But even if they don't have this commandlet, the system-wide transcripts are still going to pick up what you're doing in the ISE, what you're doing in PowerShell, what you're doing in your own little C# application that's calling PowerShell commandlets. And when you're doing it in C#, the transcript looks a bit funny because we have to have kind of a textual version of an API call, but you can actually still see that somebody created a PowerShell, added these parameters, and this was as reasonable of a representation of the output as we get.
Did you put it in the engine or the parser? Because you can replace the parser.
We put it in the engine. Yeah, the parser is the thing that takes a script and tells PowerShell, here's what the script is, and then from there the engine takes over and actually does everything at runtime. So invoking the for each loops, invoking the commandlets. So this was something that we added just deeply to the engine, that the whole ecosystem grows. And that's been always one of our primary goals with PowerShell and the primary benefits of PowerShell, is that every improvement we make to the engine, everything gets better without writing a single stitch of code. Now one of the things that I was talking about in terms of, I'm going to stop yelling at you.
So the start transcript that's being used in the ISE is the same as in the console.
Exactly.
That's why you see also the computer name being added.
Yep.
Both in the ISE
Yep.
and in the console.
Yeah, we just literally, like get process doesn't care whether it's run in the console or the ISE or anything. We did exactly the same thing to that whole transcripting infrastructure. It's just take out a bad decision, put it into the right place. We made a mistake there architecturally by not following our own guidance, right? So you write a commandlet, you should not be writing a -debug -whatif parameter. We just had an oversight, not realizing that hosts were going to be the same thing. This should have been a thing that made it into the engine from the start, and now it's where it should have been all along. Now, sometimes you might wonder exactly what the PowerShell engine is doing. And one of the things that has happened is that when you start to get unknown software running on your machine, one of the things that they commonly do is they'll have what's called a stager. And the stager is like this innocuous looking script. And it will go off to the internet and fetch some code from a server you've never seen before. And maybe that code itself will be encrypted so that it's not detected as it's going over HTTP.